Hey guys, my name is Zacharoni, and today I'm going to teach you how to land on an aircraft carrier in War Thunder. Now, this video will go over the basics of landing on an aircraft carrier and go into more detail about certain types of aircraft like naval planes or bombers. I want to do this because in my games, mainly in the Japanese and American tree, I see a lot of people trying to land on a Pacific map, and I don't want to say failing miserably, but failing miserably. Hopefully, this video will allow you to become a master at bringing your plane down in one piece, and maybe you'll have a little fun along the way. With that being said, let's get into it. The first step in landing an aircraft is knowing your aircraft carrier. First, ask yourself, is it moving? To know if it is, check for this stream of white water behind your carrier, although this may not always be present, so make sure to eyeball the movement by getting up close. This stream also shows you a very important aspect of the landing. Which direction is the carrier moving? Now, if it wasn't moving in the first place, it's okay. But if it is, direction can make or break your landing. How so? As you can see here, something strange happens when you land on a carrier. You aren't moving, but your speed is still somewhere around 50 kilometers per hour. This is because relative to the ground, you are in fact going 50 kilometers per hour, but relative to the carrier, you're going 0. Now, why is that important? Well, say I'm landing on the carrier from this direction at about 150 kilometers per hour. Because the carrier is coming towards me at a speed around 50 kilometers per hour, relative to the carrier, I'm going to hit that deck at 200 kilometers per hour, even though my speed says I'm going only 150. Now, let's say I land from this direction at again 150 kilometers per hour. Since the carrier is moving away from me at 50 kilometers per hour, relative to the carrier, I'm hitting the deck at 100 kilometers this time. Now, which direction do you think is easier? If you said this direction, you're correct. You are landing at almost 100 kilometers per hour less than you would be going the other way. Landing on this side is the mistake I see most often, because on Pacific maps, the carriers are usually moving towards the battlefield. Now, let's do some actual landings. First off is Naval Aircraft. Right here, I've got a perfect setup for a carrier landing with the A6M5. The first thing I do in this landing is slow down. You'd think this is obvious, but I see many people not doing this because they put too much trust in their hook. I do an obligatory rudder wiggle here so I can slow down faster, but make sure you don't overdo it and slam into the water. Mousing keeps you from dipping too much, but trust me, it's happened before. The next thing I do is put down my gear and turn on landing flaps. Landing flaps are important as they give you the most lift for your speed, allowing you to go much slower before stalling. The last thing I do before the landing is something I like to call testing the stall. What this means is I'm trying to find the slowest speed I can go without stalling. This is very easy to do if you have some extra room from your run-up. You can do this by watching your speed and altitude, and adjusting your throttle to make sure you are going slow enough to land, but fast enough to stay in the sky, allocating a bit of breathing room for altitude changes. This special speed is around 140 kilometers per hour. This WEP is because, at these speeds, your throttle doesn't work as normally as it should, and you need more power in order to quickly gain speed, especially if you are losing it. At this point we've been lined up for the carrier, and we never dipped below the deck. This is just a safety procedure. When you feel comfortable, cut your throttle and bring it down like you were landing on a runway. Your hook should do the rest. And congrats! You just landed on a carrier with a naval aircraft. I want to put emphasis on testing the stall and staying above the deck. Without knowing the slowest speed you can go and staying above it, you run the risk of quickly and suddenly losing altitude, ending in a crash. Another thing I see often is people missing the wire. You have to cut your throttle and stall at the right moment, otherwise you risk missing the wires, which usually only cover half the ship. Sometimes you can save the aircraft, but you usually end up falling into the water. Remember what I told you about slowing down? Well, this is another mistake I see people make often. They don't reduce their speed at all, hoping that their hook does all the work for them. This ends up with them just touching the carrier, as they can't bring the hook down enough to catch. Not every aircraft is going to have a hook, however. and not every map is going to have an airstrip. In these cases, you're going to need a little bit more finesse. Now before you even land, you need to know something when you take off. What is that special stall speed? To find out, take off with landing flaps. When you begin to gain altitude, clock the speed and make sure to not go below it when you're landing. Now landing non-naval planes is scary even for me. There's a lot you have to do, and you have to do it in a short amount of time. First things first, slow down. You can wiggle and even fire your guns if you want to. Next is to put out the gear and landing flaps. Remember your stall speed, and make sure to test it. Landing these planes hinges a lot on slowing down, so make sure you have a bit of height so that when you cut your throttle, you can lose more forward momentum. Fire your guns throughout the final landing, until they jam. When you hit the deck, make sure to use your brakes instantly, and to wiggle your rudder as much as possible. Before you reach the end, jam your rudder towards the direction in which you have the most room, and hope for the best. If all goes well, you'll have an extremely impressed team, and an undamaged plane. These types of planes are finicky when it comes to slow speeds, so it's okay if you end up hitting the deck. You can avoid this by staying above your stall speed. Staying above your stall speed is tricky in itself though, as if you're going too fast, you'll fall off the deck. There's a way to make things easier though. We do everything normally, but this time, don't put out your landing gear. It might sound counterintuitive, but this is probably the easiest way to safely put a fast and heavy plane onto a carrier. Instead of relying on the friction of the brakes, we use the friction of the entire plane sliding on the deck. To do this, instead of focusing on stopping, just focus on putting the plane softly on the deck. The gentler, the better. Well, you get the idea. In fact, on flatter planes, you can go pretty fast when belly flopping. In the Mustang, I managed to do it at 200 kilometers per hour. Just don't push your luck. War Thunder doesn't just have fighter planes, however. Bombers are the absolute trickiest, and seem like they have no chance at landing. But with a calm mindset, it's surprisingly possible. Here I have the G5N1, which is one of the worst maneuvering bombers in the game. This is great to make the point that just because a bomber is big and slow, doesn't mean you should worry about landing them. Without putting down our landing gear, we're going to slow down and put on our landing flaps. I forgot to say this before, but in order to put on landing flaps without your gear out, you need to use the brackets, right above your enter key. We need to test the stall very carefully here, as it is hard to come out of a severe loss of speed and altitude in a bomber. We also need to make sure we are lined up for the carrier beforehand. At landing speeds, it is very hard to make even the slightest corrections in a bomber. Just bring her in nice and easy. What we're aiming for is a smooth smack on the deck in order to slow the bomber before hitting the conning tower without breaking the plane. It's a juggle between staying airborne and carefully hitting the deck at a stall that is acceptable. Just stay calm. You shouldn't have to make any sudden movements. When you're lined up, it's good to look towards the side of your bomber, so you make sure that you hit the deck as flat as possible. Be careful of your speed and altitude, however. Use the W and S keys to control your pitch. A successful landing is usually a repair time of 50 seconds or less. Try to wait until the final seconds of the landing to look to the side of your aircraft, as you might stray off course unexpectedly. Also, make sure you hit the deck early enough or you'll end up with a torn wing, or worse. I'll also emphasize landing flat instead of landing soft with bombers, as the tail isn't always the most structurally sound part of the plane. You might say that you can just land with gears, and for the most part, you're right. However, this is extremely hard, and requires pinpoint precision and multitasking. You're better off with no gear. The best thing though is to practice, practice, practice. To do so, go to the Research tab and find the plane you want to practice landing with. Right-click on it and select Test Flight. For the Japanese, American, and British trees, this will bring you to a map in which you can take off and land from carriers. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully, after this video, you'll go on to land every single aircraft carrier landing attempt from this point on. If you liked the video, consider subscribing, as I hope to do more War Thunder videos in the future. With that being said, and me not having an outro, I'll see you guys later.